Welcome to the COMM 401 Team 2 podcast, Episode 1, The Trojan Horse Affair. The Trojan Horse letter appeared out of nowhere in 2014 and sent shockwaves first through the Birmingham, England school community and quickly across all of Britain. Were a secret group of Islamic terrorists training young school children to be terrorists? Was Karl Marx right when he said criticism is not afraid of its findings? Because it certainly appears someone was afraid. Listen as our intrepid investigative journalists use the critical approach of organizational communication to analyze and untangle the mystery of the Trojan Horse affair.
To hear alum, reading through all these articles and listening to the podcast, we come to find out that he was accused of being the ringleader when it comes to talking about the Trojan Horse affair. During this affair, teachers were accused of trying to Islamize schools. This took place in several schools throughout Birmingham, England. During this time, Tahir was chairman and oversaw 3 schools in Birmingham. Tahir was accused of writing the 72-page document titled Towards Greater Understanding, Meeting the Needs of Muslim Pupils in State Schools, Information and Guidance for Schools. Because of this, Tahir was accused of undermining essential British values. During this podcast, Tahir was very openly explains that he was never running a plot. Tahir denies ever being an extremist. In his past, he had turned around so many failing schools, all while facing racism towards him and many other students. After being accused of this, his career that he worked so hard to build was over. The Trojan Horse affair as a whole embodies the critical approach. In this case, Tahir alum was allegedly trying to over-dominate British schools by enforcing strict Islamic rules. With this happening, schools were revamped and mandated British rules to be taught in hope of children not to be so susceptible to extremist ideas.
Rizvana Dar was hired as a leader to help turn things around at Adderley School. Everyone thought she was quite impressive and very smart at first. What they all seemed to like about her was that she made sure that the children's interests came first. From the critical approach standpoint, we can see that her power gave her a lot of authority over others, and she could manipulate those other people in certain ways because of this. An example is when a letter was left in Rizvana's mailbox from a teacher named Hilary who allegedly put in her letter of resignation. When Rizvana confronts her in her office saying she accepts the letter, Hilary states that she didn't write anything, and instead of investigating the situation further or talking about it, Rizvana puts her on administrative leave. And the same thing happened with 3 other teaching assistants. Ultimately, she thought that they were a threat to her job and she wanted to get rid of them. When it came time that Rizvana was threatened that if she terminated employment of these teachers' assistants, no backup from the city council would be provided if the case was ever brought to trial, and that the school would be on its own in defending itself. She continued to terminate their employment and was not scared of the threats she received. And I think this has a lot to do with the power she has and the team she was attempting to build that would have her back at the end of the day. Manipulation takes place in this scenario because when Hilary asks to see the letter, Rizvana says she doesn't have it. I think it's a perfect example of how a critical theorist would argue that there are huge power disparities between those who have more power and those who do not.
To start with some background on Michael Gove, he was the education secretary while the Trojan Horse affair was going on. He's a member of the Conservative Party, and he has served under various prime ministers, having run multiple times for the position himself. To this day, he holds rather important governmental positions, in general, a rather powerful man. Let's go ahead and discuss his actions during the Trojan Horse affair. Michael Gove showed that he supported the narrative that there was this plot to take over British schools through both his words and his actions. Assuming his actions were taken in good faith, that he truly believed that British school children were at risk, then you could look at his actions through the lens of the critical approach as using his authority as an influential member of the government to protect a vulnerable class, children. However, taking out the assumption of good faith, we see his actions take on another meaning, one where this whole large mess is being used as an excuse to misuse his authority to further increase the oppression of Great Britain's Muslim population.
Brian Reed, the producer and co-host of the podcast, uses a critical approach in the lens of a detective. He made multiple comparisons to Sherlock Holmes. He wanted to find out who wrote the letter. He teamed up with people and even set up a detective station in the bedroom. He analyzed the letter and the different parts, which helped him notice the letter defended Adderley primary, which caused suspicion for him. He would go back and reread the letter to see if they discovered anything to unlock secrets. He questions why the government didn't find out who wrote the letter. This caused so many people to lose their jobs and reputations. The audit report was very similar to the letter, which he thought was very odd that no one caused questions to earlier. Interpreting why someone might have wrote the letter to find the deeper intentions. Was it a fake letter to draw attention or to get people fired? Rizvana Dar faked resignation letters and wanted to draw attention away. Was that the reason the letter was written? The critical approach also mentions synthesize and evaluate literacy works. He's looking at it like, why didn't people want to get to the bottom of it? But he will. He thinks it's unfair to ruin a good thing that the teachers had going for the Muslim students. He used the critical approach to find the truth because he believes the truth was never made a priority.
Hamza Syed, co-host and producer of the Trojan Horse Affair, came to Britain from Pakistan as a young boy, but was raised in a way that made him doubt his Muslim friends when they said there was a wider conspiracy against Muslims by white people. And when it came to him as an individual, he thought of himself as the friendly Muslim that white people were comfortable with. But he wasn't completely blind to the racism he witnessed every day. He chose to switch careers from medicine to journalism to, as he puts it, get access to white rooms of power and focus them on our brown issues. That is some textbook Karl Marx critical approach stuff right there. And then, early in episode 3, after a frustrating interview with a councilman, we can hear the moment Hamza realizes he and his Muslim community actually have been oppressed. It suddenly becomes clear to him that the government, the school system, and the press had taken control of the organizational discourse around not only the topic of the Trojan Horse letter, but about Muslims in general. And mind-blowingly, about how Hamza himself would be perceived. That is some serious pervasiveness of power in desperate need of resistance and emancipation.
In the end, there's a lot to analyze regarding this podcast utilizing the critical approach. A lot of resistance, manipulation, and abuse of authority were evident throughout this podcast in the hopes of discovering who wrote the letter in the Trojan Horse Affair.